You pull into the station on the edge of Kanazawa, the pump handle cold in your hand, and the number on the display climbs faster than your heartbeat. That was me, years ago, watching the money spin, feeling helpless. Then the taxi driver at the next pump did something so small I almost missed it, and it changed how I drive to this very day. Here is the claim, and I want you to sit with it. The ordinary people I lived among in Japan pulled 20, sometimes 30% more distance out of the exact same tank of fuel that you and I burn through, using nothing but the way their right foot pressed a pedal. No gadget, no additive, no new car. Just a habit, taught quietly from one driver to the next, born in a country that once nearly ran dry. This did not come from a laboratory selling you something. It survived because a whole nation was forced to learn it in the 1970s, and then it was written into a single government document in 2003 that almost nobody outside Japan has ever read. I am going to hand you that document's core secret before we finish. And I promise you this, it works in the car sitting in your driveway right now, no matter how old you are or how old it is. I was a skeptic, a loud one. I thought fuel economy was fixed at the factory, printed on a sticker, and that anyone telling you otherwise was selling snake oil. I had wasted money on the magnets, the little chips you plug into the lighter socket, the miracle bottles you pour in the tank. All of it garbage. So when I first noticed how differently Japanese drivers behaved, I assumed it was my imagination. It was not. And once I understood what they were actually doing, I could not stop seeing it. Let me take you back to that taxi driver, because he is where my whole understanding cracked open. He topped off his tank, and I noticed he stopped the moment the nozzle first clicked. He did not squeeze in more. He did not chase a round number. I asked him, in my broken Japanese, why he stopped so early. He smiled and told me something I had never once heard back home. He said the extra fuel you force in past the first click often gets pulled straight into the vapor recovery system and burned off as fumes you pay for it, but your engine never drinks it. On a hot afternoon, that top-off can vanish before you leave the lot. Now, that alone saved me a few coins, but it was not the real lesson. The real lesson was in the question he asked me back. He looked at my rental car and asked how I accelerated away from a stop. I did not understand why that mattered. He just laughed gently and told me that the pump is not where most people waste their fuel. The waste happens in the first 5 seconds after a green light and in the last 5 seconds before a red one. I had spent my whole life obsessing over the price per gallon on the sign. He was telling me the price on the sign barely mattered compared to what my own foot was doing. I want you to notice something already. Nobody ever taught you this. Not your father, not your driving instructor, not a single television advertisement. And there is a reason for that, which I will come to because it made me genuinely angry once I understood it. But first I need you to understand where this knowledge came from, because that history is what convinced my stubborn, doubting mind that this was real and not folklore. You have to picture Japan in the autumn of 1973. This is a country that, even now, imports very nearly all of its oil. Around 99% of it comes from outside its borders. It grows no oil of its own worth, speaking of. So when the oil crisis struck that October, and the price of crude roughly quadrupled in a matter of months, Japan did not experience it as an inconvenience. It experienced it as a national emergency that reached into every kitchen and every garage. I met people who lived through it, old enough now to be great-grandparents, and the way they described it stayed with me. Gas stations closing on Sundays, television broadcasts ending early to save power, shops going dark, and a single word repeated everywhere, a word I had heard as a cute souvenir shop slogan and never truly understood until then, motenai. It means roughly, what a waste, but said with a kind of moral weight, a quiet shame at letting anything useful slip through your fingers. To waste fuel in that winter was not just expensive. It felt wrong. And here is what fascinated me. That feeling did not fade when the crisis passed. It hardened into ordinary habit, the way you might still turn off a light when you leave a room because your grandmother scolded you for it once. A whole generation of Japanese drivers learned to treat every drop of fuel as if the pumps might close again on Sunday, and they passed those habits down without ceremony, the way you pass down how to hold chopsticks. By the time I arrived decades later, no one even called it a technique. It was simply how you drove. But that raises the obvious question, doesn't it? If these habits are so effective and so simple, why did they never cross the ocean to us? Why did I reach my middle years having never heard a single one of them? That is where the story stops being charming and starts being something that genuinely bothered me. Think about who profits when you and I drive badly. Every hard acceleration you make, every unnecessary brake, every minute you sit idling in a parking lot with the engine running that is fuel being burned for nothing, and fuel burned for nothing is fuel you have to go back and buy again. The station on the corner does not sell you the miles you travel. It sells you the fuel you consume, and the faster you consume it, the more often you come back. A driver who squeezes 30% more distance out of every tank is a driver who visits the pump far less often. Multiply that across millions of drivers, and you begin to understand why nobody ever ran a cheerful advertisement teaching you to lift your foot sooner. I am not telling you there is a secret room where men in suits plot against your fuel economy. I am telling you something quieter and more honest. Nobody with money had any reason to teach you this, and plenty of people had good reason to let it stay forgotten. Convenience was sold to you instead. Bigger engines, faster starts, the thrill of pressing the pedal down, an entire culture of driving built around consumption, while on the other side of the world an entire culture had been quietly built around thrift. The first thing, the one the taxi driver pointed at, is the gentle start. When the light turns green, most of us treat it like a small race. We press down, the engine surges, and the car lunges forward. That surge feels powerful. It feels efficient, even like we are getting somewhere. It is the single most wasteful thing you do all day. A hard acceleration from a standstill dumps an enormous amount of fuel into the engine in a very short time, because pushing a heavy object from zero to speed is the hungriest thing a car ever does. The Japanese drivers I watched did the opposite. They eased away, smooth and unhurried, letting the car gather speed gently. It looked almost lazy. It was, in fact, precise. The second habit is reading the road far ahead. I'd always driven by reacting. I looked at the car in front of me, and when it stopped, I stopped. The drivers around me in Japan looked much further down the road. They saw the red light 2 blocks away and simply took their foot off the accelerator early, letting the car glide toward it. Here is the part that stunned me when I finally learned the mechanics of it. In almost every modern fuel-injected car, when you lift off the accelerator while still in gear and rolling, the engine cuts the fuel supply to the cylinders almost entirely. It is called deceleration fuel cutoff. For those seconds while you coast toward the light in gear, your engine is drinking essentially nothing, not sipping, nothing. Let that sink in, because it did something to me. Every time I used to accelerate up to a red light and then slam the brakes, I was doing 2 wasteful things at once. I was burning fuel to build speed I was about to throw away, and then I was using my brake pads to convert that expensive speed into useless heat. The driver beside me, lifting off early and coasting in gear, was burning nothing during that same stretch, and barely touching the brakes. Same road, same distance, same destination. One of us paid for it twice, the other paid almost nothing. The third habit is holding a steady speed. Our instinct on an open road is to speed up and slow down, surge and ease, ride the pedal like we are having a conversation with it. Every one of those little surges costs fuel, because every time you accelerate you spend, and coasting back down never gives it back. The drivers I admired held their speed like a held note in music, smooth, even, boring honestly to a passenger, but boring is cheap, drama is expensive. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking right now because I thought it too. You are thinking, that is all very well for a taxi driver crawling through Kanazawa, but I live somewhere else. My roads are different, my car is different, I am too old to relearn how to drive, and this is one more thing that works over there and not here. I want to speak to you directly for a moment, because this next part was built for exactly that doubt. None of what I am about to give you requires a Japanese car. None of it requires a new car. None of it requires you to buy a single thing, install a single gadget, or change a single part of your daily route. The deceleration fuel cutoff I described is not a Japanese feature. It is built into essentially every fuel-injected gasoline car sold in the last 30 years, including the one you drive. The engine was always capable of drinking nothing on the approach to a stop. You simply were never taught to let it. The habit is free. It is available on your very next trip to the shops. And you are absolutely not too old, because it is not a skill that demands quick reflexes. It demands the opposite, a slower, gentler, more patient foot, which is something that tends to come more easily with age, not less. And the thrifty one worked better. If you want to go deeper into exactly how that thrifty culture thinks, not just about driving, but about every corner of ordinary daily life, I have written about it at length in my books Japanese Fix, Deep Japanese, and The Full System. These are not books about tourism or language. They are about the specific, learnable ways that ordinary Japanese households stretch every resource further than we ever thought possible, the same logic as this taxi driver applied to food, to money, to time. You will find them in the description below, and I think you will recognize on the first page the same feeling you are having right now, that something simple and honest was always available, and no one ever pointed you toward it. So let me show you exactly what these ordinary drivers did, the things I watched with my own eyes and slowly began copying until they became mine. Here is how you begin, today, in whatever you drive. On your next drive, pick one thing and only one thing. When a light ahead of you turns red, or you see traffic slowing far up the road, take your foot off the accelerator early and let the car coast toward it in gear. Do not shift into neutral. Coasting in neutral actually keeps the engine drinking fuel to idle, so leave it in gear and simply lift off. Let the car slow itself. You will find you barely need the brakes at all. Do that one thing for a week and it will start to feel natural. Then add the gentle start, then the steady speed, one habit at a time, until they stop being techniques and start being simply how you drive, exactly the way it happened for an entire nation. And let me answer the money question directly, because this audience has been promised savings before and been let down. The Japan Automobile Federation, which is their equivalent of the motoring clubs we know, has run controlled tests on these habits for years. Gentle, smooth driving against aggressive driving on the same route, same car, same day. The gap they measure is not a rounding error. Smooth, anticipatory driving routinely returns on the order of 10 to 25% better fuel economy than aggressive driving, depending on the route and traffic. Put that in the only terms that matter your wallet. If you spend, say, $200 a month on fuel, a 15% improvement is $30 a month back in your pocket, month after month, for the rest of your driving life. Around $360 a year from moving your foot differently. And it compounds because you also brake less, which means your brake pads and rotors last longer, which is money you never see leaving because it never leaves. But there is one more habit I have to tell you about, because it is the one that made me feel like an absolute fool for all the years I did the opposite, convinced I was doing the right thing. The warm-up. I was raised to believe you should start your car and let it idle for several minutes before driving, especially on a cold morning, to warm the engine and protect it. My father did it. His father did it. I did it faithfully, sitting in my driveway on winter mornings, engine running, going nowhere, burning fuel, and telling myself I was being kind to my car. When I mentioned this to a Japanese neighbor, an older man who had kept the same little sedan running beautifully for over 20 years, he looked at me as if I had told him I warmed up my refrigerator. He explained patiently that a modern engine with fuel injection does not need a long idle to warm up, and that idling is actually one of the worst ways to warm an engine, because it warms slowly and unevenly while burning fuel to move exactly nowhere. The fuel economy of an idling car is precisely 0 miles per gallon. You are getting nothing for what you spend. The gentlest and fastest way to warm a modern engine, he told me, is to start it, wait just 20 or 30 seconds for the oil to circulate, and then simply drive gently. The engine warms far faster under a light load than sitting still, and you are actually going somewhere while it happens. Ah, everything I had been taught was not just useless, it was backwards. I did the arithmetic on my own foolishness once, and it stung. Idling 10 minutes every winter morning, burning fuel for nothing, over a season, over years. The old man had been quietly driving away after 30 seconds his entire life, and his engine had outlasted mine by a decade. This is what I mean when I say the thrifty culture simply worked better. It was not superstition. It was closer to the truth than the expensive habits I had inherited. By now you understand the shape of it. Gentle starts, coasting to stops in gear, steady speeds, no wasteful idling. Stop at the first click of the pump, each one small, each one free. Together, a completely different relationship with the fuel you buy. But I promised you at the very beginning a specific secret from a specific document, the one thing that ties all of this together, written down in Japan in 2003, that almost no one outside that country has ever read. And now you have earned it. In 2003, facing both the cost of imported oil and the pressure to cut emissions, several arms of the Japanese government came together and formed something called the Eco Drive Promotion Council. This was not a folk tradition anymore. This was the nation deliberately taking the habits its people had learned by hard experience in the 1970s and writing them down as official guidance, a set of recommendations for how every driver in the country should press the pedal, 10 points in all. And buried in that list is the single most powerful and most specific instruction I have ever encountered on the subject, one so precise that it turns a vague idea into something you can actually measure with your own eyes. They call it, in Japanese, fuwato akuzaru. It translates to something like the gentle, soft accelerator, the floating start. And here's the specific instruction, the number that changed my driving forever. When you pull away from a standstill, aim to take a full 5 seconds to reach a speed of about 12 miles an hour. 5 seconds, count it. That is far, far slower than your instinct tells you to go. Your instinct wants to be at that speed in 2 seconds, maybe less. The council's guidance is to stretch those first precious seconds out, deliberately and patiently, 5 long seconds to reach the speed of a brisk jog. And the payoff they documented for that one change alone, on the order of 10% better fuel economy across your driving, 10% from a single countable habit that you can start on your very next green light. That is the buried secret. Not a machine, not a fuel, a count of 5, written into a government document over 20 years ago, drawn from a hard lesson learned half a century ago and never taught to you. I want you to understand why this specific number is so powerful, because this is what finally converted me completely. Vague advice like drive smoothly is easy to ignore, because you always think you already do. But 5 seconds to 12 miles an hour is a test you cannot lie to yourself about. The first time I actually counted it, I was genuinely embarrassed by how quickly I was flooring it before. 1001, 1002, I was already going faster than the guidance allowed by the count of 2. It exposed a lifetime of waste in a single stoplight. And once you can measure a thing, you can master it. That is the genius of what those people wrote down. They did not give you a feeling. They gave you a number to count. There is one final piece I will add to that document's wisdom, because it costs nothing, and I check mine because of it. The same eco-driving guidance emphasizes tire pressure. A tire that is underinflated drags against the road, and your engine has to burn extra fuel just to overcome that drag. Let your tires drop well below their proper pressure, and you can quietly lose a few percent of your fuel economy day after day without ever knowing why. The proper number is printed on a sticker inside your driver's door frame, not the number on the tire itself, which is the maximum, but the one the car maker specifies on that door sticker. Check it once a month with a gauge that costs a few dollars, and you claw back fuel you did not even know you were losing. The old man with the 20-year sedan checked his religiously. Of course he did. So picture the whole thing together now, the way I finally saw it. A country with almost no oil of its own, frightened into thrift in a single hard winter, turning that fear into quiet daily habit, passing it down without fuss for 50 years, and finally writing it into an official guide that spread through their whole society while ours never heard a whisper of it. Meanwhile, you and I were sold speed and surge and the little thrill of the pedal, and we paid for that thrill at the pump again and again, coming back more often than we ever needed to, never once told that a count of 5 and a lifted foot could have kept a third of that money in our hands. That is what I brought home with me. Not a souvenir, a way of driving that I now cannot switch off. My family teases me for coasting to red lights and easing off the line like I have all the time in the world. But I have watched my own fuel last noticeably longer. My brakes wear slower, and my trips to the station grow further apart. And every time I count those 5 slow seconds away from a green light, I think of that taxi driver in Kanazawa and the small thing he did that I almost missed. Here is the truth I want to leave in your hands. You did not lose money at the pump because fuel is expensive. You lost it because no one ever taught you the habits that a whole nation learned the hard way and quietly kept to themselves. That knowledge was never secret because it was complicated. It was overlooked because it was simple and free and made no one any money to teach you. You have it now. And I think you are the kind of person who already suspected this. The kind who has felt, standing at the pump, watching that number spin, that something about the whole arrangement was designed to keep you coming back, that the simple, honest way of doing things had been buried under everything they were trying to sell you. You were right. You were right all along. This is just the first proof of it. So let me ask you something specific, and I truly want you to answer. On your next drive, count those 5 seconds off the line, 1001, 1002, all the way to 5, and then come back and tell me in the comments how slow it felt compared to how you have driven your whole life. I read them, and that one number, 5 seconds, tells me more about how deep this habit runs in us than anything else could. Leave that comment. Tell me what the count of 5 felt like. And if some part of you feels what I felt, that you have just recovered something that was quietly taken from you, then come with me. This channel is not about a channel. It is a group of us, slowly recovering the simple, honest, forgotten ways of doing ordinary things, one at a time, the ways that were working long before anyone tried to sell us the complicated version. Subscribe and stand with us, because the next thing I am going to show you is a Japanese method for keeping vegetables fresh for weeks without a refrigerator drawing power all day, a technique from the deep snow country that I watched an old woman use, and that made me throw out half of what I thought I knew about my own kitchen. I cannot wait to hand it to you. And that is where I will stop, because the deepest part comes next. Inside the quiet wisdom circle, you get the full driving method, picking up right where I stopped. Ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You would not be alone. So many mindful folks are already inside. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, one click.